If last year's football staff was operating off of the good old buddy everybody safe system, this year's staff is operating off of the fired up, bring the fire, or get fired from your position system. And that is precisely what we need to raise the expectations once again in Stillwater, America.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on X at All Day State. Today, we're partially brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment matter more, especially right now when new customers can get $200 back in bonus bets when your first $5 hauler is a winner. Get with FanDuel today. Meanwhile, we get into the conversation of this football staff being entirely different than not only last year, but some of the previous years. I think it's very evident that last year's staff kind of dealt with some complacency and they leaned a little bit too heavily on the returning seniors and returning upperclassmen, assuming that everybody was going to run their own checks and balances system to make sure that the development, the younger guys, was going the right way. Everyone was paying enough attention in the film room to make it transferable to the field. This year is entirely different. And again, we've covered at times that there's seemingly an NFL model that's being followed here, rookie minicamp, OTAs, and getting down to roster cuts, and how getting down to those roster cuts should make the competition level significantly different in Stillwater, America, which should allow us to raise our expectations at least a little bit. After a 3-9 season, my early on pre-spring designation was around 7-5. I felt like that was almost a safe pick for Oklahoma State football to get back where they're supposed to be. That's competing for Big 12 titles. That's being in the CFP playoff conversation at the end of the season. This staff is not playing around, and you're hearing some of the top guys in the Oklahoma State media landscape, the Robert Allens, the McLean Baxleys, the Barry Trammels of the world, that this team is operating different because the coaching staff just hits different. There's a lot of fire being brought to the stadium. And they're expecting the players to not only bring that fire, but find ways to adapt and overcome to an entirely new situation. This is not the traditional Oklahoma State spring model. And thankfully, we do get to have a spring game to some semblance to kind of, catapult us into the fall. And what their roster is going to look like, who knows? But here's the bright side. It doesn't matter who wins the jobs. The idea of certain coaches playing favorites and forcing those guys, or at least forcing their opinions on why those guys should be everyday starters, even though it didn't necessarily show up on the field, that is gone. There is none of that. And now you're hearing again from more and more people that this is different because the coaching staff is jumping up and down on these players, making them understand that you are fighting for a spot. There's no guarantees here. Whether you showed up with a scholarship, you're already here with a scholarship, you're trying to earn a scholarship, we do have to get down to that 105 roster limitation, especially after we bring in the non-spring freshmen. So this is going to change significantly. But once again, this is an emphasis to me that the expectations can, in fact, climb. Talent, I don't think you could argue, other than maybe some deficiencies we had on the line, was not necessarily an issue. It was all complacency and coaching and predictability and the understanding that we weren't going to be able to do a lot of in-game adjustments to make things difficult on the opposition. This NFL model that has been brought to Stillwater, obviously it might be somewhat complex, and obviously it's going to add another layer to the Cowboy culture. But is this not precisely maybe what we've needed? Over the years, Mike Gundy has done a very good job in finding some obscure coaches from all across the country that he knew likely were going to find a way to stick around for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, simply because he was the one unearthing them, right? The diamonds in the rough, the Mike Yursich of the situation. I really thought that there was a good chance that Brian Nardo could potentially be that, but he got kind of relegated to a different role, and that's because the season got derailed. And I think the season got derailed, again, because of the favoritism, because of the complacency within the coaching staff to not make sure that everybody was doing everything they were supposed to. And then the seniors and the upperclassmen were, in fact, leading the locker room appropriately. Having a little bit of a discrepancy between the redshirt freshmen, the freshmen that might play, it shouldn't be completely separate. Right? we're in an era where people can leave pretty easily, unfortunately, even post-spring. So if there's no conversation, there's no involvement with the younger guys, you're really putting them at a disadvantage. And in my opinion, that is one of the biggest differentiations between this year and last year, is that, again, that's not happening. The best players are going to play. So whoever wins the quarterback battle, whether it's Haas Haney or Garrett Rangel or Zane Flores or Maluake Smith, I think we can all take some solace in the fact that at least the opening few weeks, right? Because sometimes things do change. I know words are hard for me, see? But coming into it, it's going to be the individual that has the ability to do the most in a full team setting, right? We're just now getting on pads, which is really when you see some of the younger classmen have a little bit of a drop off from the upper guys that have been doing this for a while, that have had a lot of Rob Glass time to get their bodies prepared for what is to be a long season. Because let's face it, if you want to make a run at a Big 12 title and then obviously a CFP, then you're going to have a very long year. We discussed how there are some teams, like if you played in the CFP and you decided not to have a spring game, I mean, and that kind of makes some sense because you just played more games than everybody else anyways. But Oklahoma State should be at least in those conversations. Oklahoma State should always be a top 25 program year in and year out. We should theoretically, technically, be the flag bearers of the new Big 12. And unfortunately, whether you're a big football individual or not, this is a sport that drives the bus for everybody. So to have this completely new approach in Stillwater, Oklahoma to coaching, it's not the same old system that we've always run. We don't coach the same way. We are getting the most out of these players because they understand that it's not going to be a matter of, what are you going to transfer in the spring? It could very well be a matter of, we need you to transfer in the spring because you're just not going to make the 3 deep no matter what happens, no matter what your past was, no matter what your recruiting stars were, no matter what your scholarship situation is. And that is the breath of fresh air that could allow us to maybe uptick here. So is 7-5 being a little bit too reserved? With the new coaching, with the new tutelage and fine-tuning the technical side of the game instead of just essentially running out there with your best 11, quote unquote. The fact that there's a war going on proves to me that we can kind of uptick some of the expectations here. Perhaps 7-5 is a little bit too low. We do have 7 home games. We do have, in my opinion, a pretty favorable schedule because we avoid some of the traditional heavy hitters of at least this last season in the Big 12. So the dynamics between this year and last year, we've kind of heard are insanely different. And now you're kind of seeing more of that come out, which, in my opinion, is precisely what had to happen. And again, kudos to Mike Gundy for not only finding a way to sift through the Board of Regents stuff and get an entire new staff, but allowing the staff to bring in their guys and allowing the new staffs to recruit their own way, to coach their own way. Obviously, they're going to have to follow some semblance of what Mike Gundy wants done on a day-to-day basis. But as far as the individual on-field coaching, we've heard Mike Gundy say it himself, we needed to get a head coach of the defense. Well, it appears as though, at least to some degree, Doug Mecham is going to be the head coach of the offense. And there's going to be some of the old school Justin Blackman, Mason Rudolph level offense that is kind of dialed in here, plus the Trayvon Boykin TCU years and some of the previous years right before TCU made it to the national championship. Some of those offenses are all going to kind of merge together, but be more designed to be more complex, to be more difficult, to be less predictable, to put defenses in the positions that you want them to be in, as opposed to relying on Herculean efforts by guys like Brennan Presley and Ollie Gordon and even DeJon Stribling to make the most out of the situation. We have coaches now that are expecting the players to understand all of this, absorb it, go through the body by glass, get in the best shape physically possible while preparing for school. And I think that is exactly what we needed. And we should all kind of uptick the expectations here. It is time to do that. So maybe 7-5 is too low. Maybe 8-4 is more appropriate. Maybe we can start creeping into the 10-win season conversations, obviously after fall. But we need to get squared away and ready for what it is to be a ton of excitement. And speaking of getting ready, you need to do the same thing to make everything more exciting. When you're going through the doldrums in a day, you need a pick-me-up here and there, and 5-Hour Energy is going to deliver that to you because, of course, Daylight Savings kind of snuck up on us. I don't even know why it's still a thing. But if you're feeling lost in the different sleep schedules, 5-Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more fun time. And that also means you might need a little boost occasionally to power you up through the days. Whether you're staying up late to watch the NCAA tournament, you're squeezing in around the golf, or you're just trying to keep your day-to-day busy operations a little bit better with 5-Hour Energy, that's going to give you a quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. You can be watching the tournament action, and it can go late into the night, and you're going to need a 5-Hour Energy. With the longer days, you're going to need to get outside and feel the energy of the sun, and sometimes a tropical burst is the best bang for your buck and the biggest quick boost. Whether you're at the game, you're traveling to the game, or you're leaving from the game, 5-Hour Energy is the easy-to-grab drink that keeps you feeling refreshed. Head on over to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors that you can choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own custom 12 or 24-pack delivered straight to your door. If you need one right about now, go grab 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're essentially absolutely everywhere. Stock up today. Stay energized. Be squared away so none of your day is dragging through the doldrums, and you can do that with 5-Hour Energy today. We need the energy out of Steve Lutz in hoops. And thankfully, we haven't had a lot of departures in the transfer portal, obviously. Broken Arrow, Connor Dow, he is in the transfer portal to leave Oklahoma State, as is C.J. Smith. C.J. Smith obviously was a walk-on from the Oklahoma City area, so it's going to be kind of interesting just to see where he goes because he obviously can have a level of success playing college basketball. And then Connor Dow. You know, it does stink because it's nice whenever you get some of the Okies to stay in state and be a part of whatever the future of Oklahoma State basketball is, of course. But at the same time, Connor Dow was clearly a deficiency to some degree for Steve Lutz and what he wanted to accomplish. So I think we're all going to cheer on Connor Dow as he, kind of looks to his next future. But we know we got Ben Ahmed coming in, the steal from Miami, who's going to be a 6'10", 275-pound, 280-pound beast down low. Ryan Crotty is an individual that can play guard or forward. Shot 46% from the three-point range last year, hit 142 threes in the process. It appears as though we should get Arturo Dean back. We should get Robert Jennings back. I know words are still hard for me. Jamiron Keller would be a pretty good addition to return. And then you have Mekhi Ragland, another 6'10", 250, 260-pound center coming in. Plus, we have the foreign forward. I'm not going to murder his name. But those seemingly are some of the guys that are returning. There's going to be some interesting names brought up in the transfer portal that I think we have a shot at. One of those being Iowa guard Brock Harding, who shot over 41% from three-point range, which is obviously a big deal in the Big Ten. I think the idea of getting somebody like Rasheed Jones from Coastal Carolina is a little bit fun to pay attention to. I really like the prospect of Omaha forward Markel Sutton becoming a Cowboy. That would be absolutely massive. But amongst all of this stuff that we have to talk about is the fact that Steve Lutz has been rumored to be one of the names that Texas A&M is trying to pursue. We obviously don't know how heavily they're willing to do so, but with J.C. Hoyt earning a new contract, and even though it does kind of tiptoe into the reminiscence of the Mike Boynton era contract, the Travis Ford era contract, those were debacles that put Oklahoma State men's basketball back for 2 decades. So although there's a little bit of hesitation just because we do have a tendency to reward coaches too early and an equal devastation, I don't think that's going to happen with J.C. Hoyt. But at the same time, if Steve Lutz is being rumored to go to Texas A&M, let's say that he does take the interview, let's say that he's interested, there's nobody out here that can pretend that we have Texas A&M money. We're not going to have Texas A&M money. Now, I do also believe that Steve Lutz believes in the old school Eddie Sutton, Henry Iba tree of basketball life. And because of that, there is a little bit of a different connection in Stillwater. And again, he's been able to bring some guys in. He's hot out on the recruiting trail. Clearly, it's extremely important to him. He knows what he can sell in Gallagher-Iba Arena. And I don't think he's done utilizing all of that. But at the same time, I do hope that he does not plan on asking Chad or anybody else for extra money. There's no leverage, in my opinion, that is worthy of paying an exorbitant amount to make sure that he stays in Stillwater. That's going to be a him decision. Now, do I think that he's got a pretty good thing going in Stillwater? Yes. Do I think that he's able to utilize his sales pitch capabilities pretty good? Yes. Do I think there's a connection that runs a little bit deeper than just surface value? Yes, I do. But at the same time, you just paid J.C. Hoyt. You just had to hire, almost 20 new football coaches. You did get to restructure the Mike Gundy contract a little bit, which is going to help to some degree. But now you're having an absolute disaster going on with baseball. And, of course, Josh Holliday just won a Big 12 title last year, won another Big 12 title a few years prior. So he ain't going nowhere, which is okay. But I do think that he needs to have the come-to-Jesus meeting that Mike Gundy had with the Board of Regents, or at least something similar to that, to make sure that he understands that there's a new lay of the land. And you cannot continue to just rest on the best facilities in the country. You do have to start getting these guys to be more competitive as a team before it makes sense. But financially speaking, if you just paid JC, you just had to pay all these football coaches, or we're not in a position, in my opinion, to be matching or negotiating a whole lot on behalf of for Steve Lutz. If Texas A&M wants to drop a massive bag of cash and pay the buyout and all that fun stuff, and he's willing to do that after 1 year, I don't want to say we have an Underwood situation, but there's obviously going to be some similarities there. Just like you could question whether the timing is applicable for J.C. Hoyt compared to what we did for Boynton and Ford. But nonetheless, if this is true, I feel bad for saying it, but it's not worth extra money. If Steve Lutz at any point in time goes to Weiberg or anybody else and says, hey, A&M is willing to offer me this. Well, I know we're not going to get there, and I don't necessarily expect Oklahoma State to get there, but I'd like you to get closer to this. I would almost draw a line in the sand, unless it's very minuscule. Like if it's more money for recruiting, NIL, whatever, then obviously we should probably make it happen. But as far as like salary, incentives, things of that nature, it shouldn't change after an NIT season. Granted, it was a successful NIT season with multiple wins. Big deal. We're all happy about it, or at least most of us for the most part, because coming into the year, if you just said we're going to go win multiple games in the NIT, likely most of us would have said you're kind of crazy. So by and large, we should be happy with Steve Lutz. Steve Lutz should be happy with this situation in Stillwater. And because of that, we should be able to hold on to Steve Lutz. But if it does not happen, I hope that we do not get in a position where we feel strong-armed to a degree that we have to, play this game with Texas A&M. I hope that doesn't happen because I think Steve Lutz does have a lot going for him. Guys, think of it. If he wants a contract extension, all right, land Jalen Montanati. You land Jalen Montanati and you finish top 6 in the Big 12, you can have a couple-year extension. I think that makes perfect sense. But again, this is also, in my opinion, a little bit of a character check. Does Steve Lutz want to follow that Henry Iba, Eddie Sutton style of tree and doing it in the place where it was kind of born? If so, then we shouldn't have a lot of concern here. But there's always a chance that if Texas A&M were to offer him life-changing retirement-level money, that he could potentially take it. And if he does, I don't think we should completely freak out. Could there have been some other guys? Possibly. But Steve Lutz clearly was a target very, very early on, especially the tail end, right, the last few weeks, essentially, of Mike Boynton being the head man. The writing was kind of on the wall, and Steve Lutz was an early target. So this is something that Chad Weiberg, I would hope, would also take it in consideration, as should Steve Lutz. You're in a good spot. You're in a good building. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of things to sell. You have people a little more willing to chip in with the NIL front. If that all equals a successful season next year, then perhaps we could have the conversation of what a new contract would look like. But again, we've done this basketball too early contract extension song and dance so often that it's put us so far behind. I just don't want to do it again. And I think we did give Steve Lutz a pretty decent contract. Therefore, again, I'm leaning on what he has said previously and how much that court means to the sport of basketball and playing defense and respecting everybody that plays on that court. I believe in all that. But we're about to find out, because sometimes, unfortunately, money does talk, and Texas A&M has more money bags than almost anybody else in America. But you could also have some money bags in your bank account here before too long. Make sure you're ready for it. It's capitalization time. When you're trying to get the most bang for your buck in the NCAA tournament, you got to do it with FanDuel. FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 back in bonus bets when your first $5 bet is a winner. That is $200 back that you can use on anything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and who's going to win the whole thing at the end and cut down the nets. With tournament games happening literally almost every day, there's always something to get excited about. And even though we're narrowing it down here, it is still easy to get excited. And it's also easy and fast to get your money from FanDuel. You get paid instantly, no waiting around, because the app is super safe, secure, and simple to use. Be a winner by getting with FanDuel today. Make sure you visit FanDuel.com to get in on the remainder of the college hoops action. All tournament long, FanDuel has been your stop, the bee's knees for all betting. Make sure that you get squared away today at FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to get the most out of your NCAA tournament season. David Taylor, please do not entertain the AJ Ferrari idea. But additionally, last year, do we recall a little bit of conversation, at least kind of permeating around the wrestling world, that after we stole Jimmy Kennedy away from Penn State, that David Taylor was probably going to kind of take it easy. And then we did get Roman Bravo Young, which, I mean, he's already graduated. Well, that's a little bit different. But he brought a couple massive Penn State coaching level pieces to Stillwater. Then obviously the natural conversation was, well, he helped recruit a lot of those dudes. He helped train a lot of those dudes. How many more Penn State Nittany Lions are going to find their way to Oklahoma State? And there was a little bit of a conversation about how, well, David Taylor's probably not going to rock the boat that much. Then he understood that he was going to ruffle feathers by making the move that he did, by accepting the Oklahoma State job. He also knew that bringing in Kennedy was going to ruffle feathers. Bringing in Roman Bravo Young would ruffle some feathers. But he also possibly knew that if you started picking off a lot of the roster last year, he would be hated to the end of time in State College. So maybe that's why we didn't pick off more of these guys. Yet here we are, right? We know we just picked up Alex Facundo, picked up Gary Steen, both Penn State and Nittany Lions, and Facundo was going to have an opportunity to be a starter this year at State College. So that's a huge get. And then Steen obviously has been at Penn State for years, so he was part of the David Taylor winning championships and the David Taylor training regiments. So I think that there's some veteran leadership coming over here that could potentially be another RTC kind of guy to help out. But he could also surprise the world. He could learn so much in his final year from David Taylor that he could make a massive run at Big 12s or Nationals or whatever the case may be. But if we also land Zach Ryder, you've got Kennedy, you've got Roman Bravo, you've got Steen, you've got Facundo. Now you could have Zach Ryder. Are we not almost the Oklahoma State Nittany Lions? And I know some people might like, well, I don't like that. But we used to own the sport of wrestling for decades and decades and decades and decades. Well, the last decade and a half-ish, it's been more or less Penn State that has owned it. So if you have some individuals, especially if you can get like a Zach Ryder who was supposed to take over for Carter Starachi, who lost the Hodge Trophy, which is the Heisman of Wrestling, to our very own Wyatt Hendrickson, the 5-time NCAA champion, was supposed to be replaced by Zach Ryder. Now, of course, the guy he beat in the national title from Ohio State, they brought in to Penn State. Now, I've also heard, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of that has a factor in Zach Ryder's transfer. But there could be a lot of other things at play. So it's not just as simple as you're bringing in the Ohio State guy. It's unnecessary. I should have been the guy. I think it's a little bit deeper than that. And we're going to find out a little bit later on if he becomes a Cowboy, if he becomes a Hawkeye or a Cyclone or whatever. It's not all going to be about NIL dollars, right? I was the Texas A&M of wrestling, so we're not going to compete with that financially. But what David Taylor just did in Nationals with Wyatt and Dean and Troy is going to speak volumes to anybody in the transfer portal, even if you're not even a Penn State Nittany Lion. So it's okay that we might have a couple years of being the O State Nittany Lions. It's okay. They are dominating the sport. They're setting records year after year. They're producing almost every person on the roster that starts as an All-American. It's hard to crack the roster. And then whenever you do finally get your shot, again, guys, Zach Ryder was undefeated. Wrestling as a redshirt freshman, unattached this year. He went 8-0. He went undefeated in the Southern Scuffle, won that whole thing. No doubt was one of the training regimental reasons why Carter Starachi ended up being a 5-time champion. So getting guys like Facundo would be insane. Getting Ryder would be arguably even bigger. And then you have a wily veteran that could find a way to pull a rabbit out of his hat and do something crazy with the Magic Man in his last year in Steen. This is a remarkable time to not only be a fan of Cowboy wrestling, but just in general. The sport of wrestling is trying to grow. It is slowly growing a little bit more. We need to find ways to make it more, of a national brand. But nonetheless, David Taylor is somebody that can move the needle enough to do that. And David Taylor just proved that with this staff and these facilities and this history, you can do something insanely special. So I've seen some people be like, well, we're just turning into Penn State. That's okay. We have to swallow the ego and pride a little bit because it does hurt to admit that Penn State runs things, but they do. We stole one of their greatest of all time to be our new coach. He borrowed one of the best coaches ever at Penn State to be his assistant. And now maybe he's like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take these guys because they make the most amount of sense. I know them. I wrestled with them. I help recruit them. I help train them. I help give them the picture as to why we can score more points than everybody else no matter what happens. So now the training is going to speed up quite a bit. So it's not just Roman Bravo Young in there with Kennedy, kind of teaching and coaching. Now you're going to have former Nittany Lions that have almost the same wealth of knowledge and experience that David Taylor's been able to kind of bring over. It's a pretty wild time to be a fan of Cowboy wrestling. And this is another reason why I say we do not need the AJ Ferrari ridiculousness and headache. Again, hopefully it was just an April Fool's thing because we don't need it. We don't need him. We can get Nittany Lions. We can get Buckeyes. We can get Wolverines. We can get Spartans. We can get all of them. We can get Cyclones. We can go into the Iowa's backyard and steal the number 1 wrestler in the state and the number 3 wrestler in America. Like, if we can go in there and do all of this, then we don't need the Ferrari headache. We're okay. We're fine. And I'm fine with us being the junior Nittany Lions for a couple of years because come 2027, 2028, that's when I think this conversation of Oklahoma State winning another natty is a realistic possibility. You just got to keep chopping down the tree. The tree is Penn State. And we do have to obviously have a degree of separation a little bit with not only Iowa, but of course now Nebraska. Things like this are going to keep us at the forefront. And anybody kind of upset that we're just stealing a bunch of Nittany Lions, I don't understand that. We should embrace it. It is what it is. They are who they are. And he was one of the major reasons why they are where they are, outside of Kale, of course. I love it. Bring it on. Hopefully Zach Ryder is a Cowboy because that would do crazy things for O State. All right, y'all. That's all we're going to have for this one right here. As always, I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here on Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Do me a favor. If you liked it, hit the like button. More importantly, we need some comments, some sharing, some subscribing. My podcast people out there. You are everything that has kind of made this thing jump and flourish and move. And I appreciate you. Do what you do. Hit the stars. Leave some more reviews. All right, y'all. Later, taters.